Welcome, welcome, dear listeners, to the Life Engineering Podcast. And today's episode is special and different because, as you know, I usually co-host with Dr. Pat. But today I'm stepping out of our usual format to have a conversation with a very special guest who has agreed to share her wisdom with us. So I welcome Marsha Vanwynsberghe. Hello, hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm thrilled to have you. I am actually thrilled to have you and about the conversation that's going to transcribe for many reasons, actually. We first connected, remember?
About a year ago, I think. Maybe a little bit over, but around a year.
Yes, through a mutual friend. And I don't know about you, but for me, it felt like an instant connection. And that led to our wonderful conversation on your podcast, Own Your Choices, Own Your Life. And now we're here again. And I couldn't be more excited to dive into our next discussion together and hear everything you have to share with us. So tell us about you. What would you like us to know?
Oh, well, there's a lot of things, and there's so many different ways that we could go with this conversation. First off, I want to say thank you for having me. And yes, we have definitely been, it was a great connection from the beginning. We've been able to, cheer each other on in the process. I was honored to have you on my episode. We recorded a few weeks ago, but it's coming up soon to release. And it's a fantastic episode. And I'm so proud of you for your book and what you're launching into the world. And yeah, so I'm grateful for that. My name is Marsha Vanwynsberghe. I am a whole lot of things, but I'm very, very passionate about teaching people the power of their subconscious mind to reframe their thoughts, their stories, their limiting beliefs so that they can actually go after what they're here to do. And I believe that so much of what blocks us is us. I really believe that it is us. And it is the power that we give to our emotions and our thoughts and our stories. We are literally talking ourselves out of anything before we start. And so when I go through this work, it's really opened up my eyes to recognize the power of our thoughts and what we're doing in our life, and how if we could learn how to move past that, work through that, we could actually go after more in our life.
I love what you just shared, and I'm sure all our listeners now have your attention because you said the keyword subconscious, unblocking. This is the Life Engineering Podcast is all about creating a life of no regrets. So there's a reason why you're here. I'll tell you, I started this podcast about a year and a half ago, maybe more. People ask me why. Why did I take the plunge? Well, the altruistic reason was simple. I wanted to share, more outside the walls of the academy. But there was a more selfish reason. I was terrified, so terrified. Even though I'm so used to teaching, I was terrified to share outside the community and to speak publicly and to share my stories. Teaching is not necessarily, yes, you share stories when you teach, but it's not the same. And I'm sharing this with you and, of course, with our listeners because you actually help through the work that you describe, people be outspoken. What is that?
So first off, I'm celebrating you because I love that you just shared that you were scared and you're doing it anyways. Because there's always this big misconception when people are looking, if you are looking up at somebody maybe who is started the podcast, is doing the thing, they've written the book, and we create this story again that they have something that I don't. And it's never true. It's never true. It's just the fact that they did it scared anyways. They looked at it and went, okay, so this is scary. And anytime we do anything new, it's scary. So we normalize it, right? Like, can we just start to normalize it? So I'm celebrating you for that. Outspoken. Yeah, you're so welcome. Outspoken. There's so many things about outspoken that speaks to me. If I can share, it's an NLP coaching certification. It's more than that, but that's the basis of what it is. I went down the path of NLP work back in 2020 because I was in a space. I had a 27-year career come to an abrupt end overnight, gone, pandemic, never came back. And it was like, talk about identity work, having to
Yeah.
redo your
Who am I
identity.
if I'm not doing this?
Yeah, it was like, I don't even understand. And I knew I was being called to do something different. I did know that. I didn't know what it was. And
Mm.
that's what I knew, right? We have the jobs and the tasks that we do. I could do that with my eyes closed. I don't mean that in any disrespect. It was just very easy. And I kept feeling there's something more. Well, backing up even further, my story started about 12 years ago. We were parents dealing with teen substance abuse. And that story came out of left field, not something we ever planned or expected. And for the first probably 3 years, I found myself searching for answers nonstop and going to all the agencies, taking the checklist, doing the things that, because I'm an action person, that's who I am. And while at the same time, I'm going to say almost hiding from the rest of the world, right?
Mm.
I didn't know how to share a difficult story, and the landscape of social media or even life, you 12 years ago, you don't talk about vulnerable things. It just was not normal. So through that process, I found myself, a lot of steps that happened in there, but I found myself in a space where I was sharing my story in a very small audience. And in that process, found out that there was a number of people who had very similar story to me. And I remember thinking, well, how can she have the same story? Like, I must be the only person in the world who has it. And that sounds so like, it sounds so ridiculous, but because we don't talk about things, we make ourselves feel more isolated. And that's what I was doing. So over the last over those years, up until 2020, I had released my solo book. I had released a couple of collaborative books. I started the podcast. I was doing a little bit of coaching, but nothing major. So come into 2020, when I decided to take my NLP coaching, the reason that it spoke to me was because the piece that she was talking about, our subconscious holding on to trauma and holding on to, our limiting beliefs and our thoughts and our patterns. And if you've been in repeat patterns, this is, we're not uncovering this. So I was like, well, I'm kind of curious. And it was the first thing I took for me. I didn't take it for anyone. I took it for me, not my business, and I signed up for it while I was in the hospital recovering from back surgery. So there was zero logical reason why I was doing it, but I felt called to. And intuitively, I was like, I think I'm supposed to do this. So I took that for me. And in that process, started to understand the power of our subconscious and how our subconscious mind is 95% of holding of our limiting beliefs and our thoughts and our decisions. And I'm like, oh, I understand. I see these repeat patterns. So fast forward, then I decided to go on and take my master's in NLP. And I just became so fascinated with how our bodies hold on to our limiting beliefs, our decisions, our traumas, our past decisions and stories. And we make them mean something about ourselves because we're not learning how to release it. Then I had the download of, I think I want to start a coaching certification. Again, no logic. That made no sense whatsoever, but I just did.
I so get you.
You get me. I know you get me. And this is why you and I can see each other and understand. When it came time to naming it, and this sounds so silly, but it was very clear. It felt like when you can learn how to change the story that you're telling yourself, the thoughts, the stories that you think are your weakness, you think that they make you not qualified, they actually are the reasons why you're qualified to do the work that you're here to do. When you start to unpack that and change that story, you can step into like your outspoken version of yourself. And it's funny, depending on what generation you're in, you might hear the word outspoken and think that's a bad thing, because I was actually, ironically, I was called that most of my life, to be honest, was outspoken, as if that's bad. Because we were in the era where kids were to be seen and not heard. And so, your thoughts and your opinions, it's not a criticism. It's just was what our culture was at that time. And I had a very feisty side to myself, which is I love that part of me, but I also recognize that we don't have to fight every battle that comes our way. We don't have to live that way. So I spent many of those early years, the subconscious mind forming years, with a very outspoken voice. Was very criticized for that. Then shut it down for a while. Then, as life continued to go on, was in a space of dealing with a very difficult shame story. And that was like, I don't want to tell anybody about this. And I do recognize that the more I learned how to speak and share my story, the more freedom I felt in what I had walked through. And that to me is embodying what my outspoken voice is. It's not outspoken from a standpoint of proving others that I'm right and they're wrong, which is where I used to live. It is
Mm.
honoring who I am and speaking from that energy, in a sense that I have value and I have things that I can offer and I have experiences that I've walked through that I know I could support somebody else with. So outspoken, I mean, as soon as it landed and I shared it with some of my closest friends, they're like, "Oh, that's absolutely you. That's you to a T. It needs to be outspoken." So it's become the, I'm going to say, the umbrella to almost everything that I do and offer falls under being outspoken.
Wow. Okay, I have so much that I wanted. I elaborate on what you just said. It so resonates with me.
Mhm.
Um, what you were talking about, and okay, one by one. My brain is in a, yeah. You said something that strike a chord on me. You said, I must be the only one facing that.
Mhm.
Is that one of the most um, common beliefs we have when we're facing a challenge? Is that what you saw
That
when
is
you were
exactly what
helping?
I saw. That's exactly what I saw because no one, I mean, also putting into perspective, I grew up in a culture where you don't talk about, like, you don't share what's going on in your life. You literally put a smile on and you say things are great, even if they're absolutely terrible, because nobody wants to hear what you have to say. And that was a message that I heard over and over. Second, you don't want to look weak. Like, you don't want to look like you are struggling. It's important that you're strong. That's the other message that I always had. And so when it came time of feeling like I must be the only person, I felt like I was, because I literally had nobody else sharing this kind of story. I mean, again, there's nothing sexy about dealing with teen substance abuse. Like, it's not something people run the other way when you deal with a topic like that. That's a shame topic. And we all have shame. We all have parts of our stories that have shame in it as well. But the challenge is when we don't talk about it, shame grows, right? It just grows and takes over and takes control. So I didn't realize that there were other people. And my counselor at that time said, "Why don't you find a Facebook group?" Like, this is probably at least 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago. Find a Facebook group. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to see if I can find one. So I Googled and I'm looking in groups. The very first group I got into had 100,000 moms. So imagine I'm sitting here thinking I'm the only person in the world who's struggling, to finding this Facebook group. And I'm like, what, how is this possible? How are there 100,000 moms in this group? Like, I don't even understand that. And that just started to open up my eyes that it's not just me. Like, I'm not the only person that's struggling. And through the process, a lot of this outspoken work that I feel so called to do is that it's not our specifics of our story that make us similar. It's the emotions and the experiences, like what the lessons that we're learning. Because I have a lot of clients who don't have my story at all, but they've learned something from what I've walked through, and that helps them in the journey. So yes, that's sorry, long and short answer is I felt very alone because we don't talk about these things. And when I finally decided to start sharing, I had many family members in a major uproar saying, "You can't do that. You can't tell people this. Like, what are they going to think?" And I'm like, "Who are they? Who are they? Like, I don't know who those they are." It was just this concept of we're constantly worried about what will they think. And I believe the reason I got to the point of feeling so isolated is because we spend far too long worrying about what everyone will think, that we don't reach out and build those connections. So that's
I so agree with you. I always say that sometimes it's not the pain that breaks your soul, it's the oppression of your feelings and not being able to express your pain that actually breaks your soul. as it is, metaphysically speaking, the soul is, compressed into a body. A soul is multidimensional. And now, if we also compress ourselves more than the body is, because we are not allowing any expression out, we literally are
Mhm.
squeezing ourselves.
Massive contraction. We're in massive,
I'm
massive
sure you see that
contraction.
in the body too.
Uh-huh. I see it in the
Physically, I
body.
mean.
Yes. Yes. And if we're in contraction, like it's literally contraction is exactly as you said. It's like your fists are pulled in. There's no space for anything new to come in because we're just not even allowing anything to come in. We're so locked up and we're preventing ourselves. It's like a protection, right? I refer to the armor all the time.
Sorry,
You
Armor,
not
your talk at the Speaker Slam was so fantastic. I shared it on Facebook, and then I found myself forwarding to clients.
Hmm.
You have to watch this. You have to watch this. It was so fantastic because it was so true for so many.
And
It was
there's
so
a
relatable.
thank you for that, and thank you for your words and for sharing it. I really do appreciate it. That was a very vulnerable share. It was a very vulnerable share. Um and it was a real recognition that like I had spent my life with my armor, but I had also been praised for having my armor. Like I was very much praised for having, like, she can just take anything and she can handle it. And she doesn't even like bat an eye or have a tear. And I was like, there was no room for that. That was never just, you just did it. So here I am. I feel like in my 50s, just trying to normalize what emotions are and
Mhm.
understand what it is to feel certain things, because you know this as anyone else, like if we can't selectively block emotions. That I did not realize that. It took a counselor to say to me, well, where do you feel joy? And I'm like, joy? Like, what are you talking about? You heard my story, right? Like, there's no joy right now. This
Well, if we disconnect our ability to feel pain, we also disconnect our ability to feel joy.
Yep, completely disconnected. And so this has also opened up. Like I feel like this beautiful outspoken expression has come out. I believe that it helped me to heal. It helped me to build better relationships with my kids, with friends, with other people. It allowed me to be vulnerable, to allow people to come in. It improved my relationship with my husband and I like 10,000 times over. There's no question that this work has improved our relationship and our communication.
I
So
think that's so important for you to emphasize because I can almost hear people saying, "Yeah, but if I share, I might offend someone, I might hurt someone." I can think about your boys. You share your story of going with substance abuse. How did they feel with that? Were they okay with you sharing?
so when I decided to share, there was no real logical reason as to why I decided to do it at the time that I did. And I want to share this piece. We were still in our story. Like when they tell you do not share, you should only share from the wound and not the scar. I don't always agree with that because I feel that there's a lot of people who have a lot of scars that are covered over that have some pretty nasty wounds underneath that they've never worked through. So I don't think the scar and the wound is a great, simple way of saying it. But we were living in the middle of it. And so when I decided to write my book, I was convinced I could find a way to share my vulnerable story. And I mean, of course, people know what it's about, they know what we were walking through. And I 100% did my very best to leave my kids in full integrity. Like because I don't, that there's
It
no
wasn't.
purpose of hurting them to share a story. Like that's not vulnerability. That's complete opposite of vulnerability.
Thank you.
And
Can you elaborate more on that?
yes, yes. So people, I get this all the time, and it does actually happen quite often. People will come to me whether they want to read a book, they want to put a talk together. They'll give me an excerpt of something that they're writing, and I'm like, you can't share it from this lens. You just can't share it from this lens because you're talking about everyone else in the story. Vulnerability is you sharing your journey. It is not me sharing, boy, do you know how much my kids screwed up? And that I don't need to tell you that. Like you would know that based on what the experience and what my story is. So there's no need for that. Vulnerability is me sharing what was life like when my plan did not go according to plan. How did I juggle when like nobody would have planned for what we were walking through? There's nobody who would put their hand up and say, yeah, I want to do that. It's just, this is what happens with life. And so I got really vulnerable on how do you put yourself back together when life is falling apart everywhere, when all of your social circles literally walk away from you because they're so scared of your story, and you're on your own on an island trying to figure out how to make life work. Like, what do you do? And how do you do it and not hold a lot of anger and resentment towards other people? Because I also had to learn how to let go of it. Didn't serve it. So these are the pieces of vulnerability. And every time I lean into I'm very vulnerable about myself. I don't give a ton about my kids, but I'm very vulnerable about myself. So in the beginning, they really didn't understand, and nor would I expect them to, because even my family and extended family, who was much older than my kids, were like, you can't do this. So there was no logical reason why I was doing it when I did. When I told my husband I felt it was time to write my own solo book, he just looked at me and he's like, are you sure you want to open this door? Like, are you sure? And I'm like, I think I have to.
Well,
And
I
he,
think you have to. There's a reason why you're facing this.
yes.
There's a purpose and meaning here.
I needed to see things this way. And that's like, I don't even like the word need, but I did. I shifted it and went, what if I could do something good with the worst thing I've ever walked through? And to me, that gave me light. It gave me light to know that I could help other people in the process. And what happened is, in a lot of ways, I was paying it forward and helping other people. What I didn't see is that it was helping to heal me. Like, I did not see that that was going to happen. And I didn't really even fully understand the amount of healing I needed to go through until really probably 2020 onward, to be honest. So I put my head down, consciously did the work, wrote the book, did the things, put the talks, and all of that was good. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But I had skipped a lot of steps in understanding that I had some healing to learn to, forgive and release and let go of, so that I had more room to take in, relationships and joy and all the good emotions too.
Wow. I so honor the fact that you walk the talk. Isn't that what you teach other women to do?
I 100% do.
Let me just correct myself, because I think I did a disservice. You don't just teach them, you mentor them. And that's a big difference. Probably the big difference is that you've done it yourself. So you know how to mentor them according to where they are in their journey. Isn't that what you do?
Yes. And that's it. And that lights me up in ways I can't even
I'm
describe.
sure.
It does. It really does. And I firmly believe, like, actually, I can tell you, I had 2 conversations regarding outspoken today. And this is exactly how they went, because this is a very common thing. I don't know how to coach people yet. I don't know if I want to coach. And I feel like I need this for myself. And I'm like, it should be for yourself first. It should be. When I took this, I wasn't doing it for coaching. I knew I was missing something within myself and I needed to do some work on me. We can never take our clients somewhere that if we have never gone there, we cannot take our clients there. And I'm sorry if that like ruffles feathers, because there's a lot of people who will continue to go out and build businesses. I'm like, but did you actually walk that? Because if you did not walk that, you should not be teaching on that. Like, I think that's a really toxic way of working in the industry. Doesn't mean that, I have a couple clients I'm supporting with divorce right now, and their life is completely blowing up. I haven't had a divorce, but the emotions and the experiences that they're sharing with me and reinventing and starting over, I have done.
It's the journey. That's
It's
right.
a journey.
It's like working with a business coach who never launched their own business.
100%. I think it's a big red flag for integrity.
It is. It is. I really, really celebrate what you do. And when you said that people tell you, I don't know how to coach people yet, but this is before they've taken your program. So of course they don't know. They are not supposed to know. They're supposed to
No,
go through it.
right. It's your biggest personal growth journey is about you. Like, any as a listener, like, it is about you. Like, you're the journey first. And through that process, like, you can want to build a business. That's amazing. Like, you can do all those things. I do believe deep down that any idea that drops down for us is for us. I do believe that. And I believe it's our job to grow into the version of us who can bring it to life. Just because I have an idea of writing a book or of helping other people write a book doesn't mean I can just do it. It's like I have to grow into that version of the person who can do that. That's our job. That's our responsibility. Nobody does that for us.
And you do that by taking action,
You
not by
think
waiting.
Yeah, I can. Yes. And I mean, trust me, there have been many moments in my life where I'm like, okay, I'm thinking and putting the pieces, etc. The thing is when you really understand how our brain works and how our subconscious brain works, sitting and thinking is not the answer. It's actually not the answer, because everything that we do is based on everything I know up until today. It's based on past knowledge. And so if I've never done what I'm trying to put myself out there to do, if I sit and think about it, the answer is going to be no every time. Like, it's just, I'm like, just say no and move on. Like, just move on. So at least you make a decision, because no decision is a decision.
I always say the clarity and the guidance, not
Yeah.
just the clarity, the divine guidance is in the action.
100%.
It's along the way, not where you are.
Yeah. And the most beautiful thing is like when you start to get into action, like I really think that the universe is like sitting there sometimes going, okay, is she going to do it? Like, is she actually going to move? Because we're not going to bring her anything that's going to help to move this forward if she's not going to move. And so we have to get into action. And then all of a sudden it unfolds in ways you could have never seen. And it requires you to move first. That's it. It always does.
Yeah. Yeah. To be in that co-creative state. Absolutely. I want to ask you something. You spoke about the book. You are a 6-time best-selling author. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's beautiful. Not because of course the what it means, but it means that you have helped many people through your book.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the beautiful part of that, the impact. But the title. Can you tell me what's the story behind the title?
So when you're writing a book, and you know this, but when you're writing a book, you can get some support, right, from other people, from editors, from publishers, etc. And it's important to tap back into what you know to be true and why you're writing it. So I could not come up with a title for the longest time.
We need to say what the title is for our listeners, in case they don't know, and I'm sure they will want to. Okay.
Absolutely. No, it's okay. And so I couldn't come up with a title. And all of a sudden I even use this with my own clients. I'm like, what was the turning point? What was the turning point? For me, the turning point, now you know the title. Now you understand it.
I have goosebumps.
For me, the turning point was when I stopped asking why. That was the turning point. Because before that, when you're stuck in a very difficult story, we know that that's not going to give us an answer. But I stayed in the whys for a really long time. Like, why me, why us, why them? Literally on repeat. Why me, why us, why them? We don't deserve this. This isn't fair. We didn't ask for this. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't understand. And when we're in that space, it's really, this is probably like the foundation of everything that started for me, in a sense, that when we're in that space of, looking for reasons why, it's a victim mindset. And there's nothing wrong with victim mindset. I think we all spend time there in our lives. Like, we have to figure out, do we want to move or not? Some people will never move from that space, and that's okay. But I know that I was there for a really long time, until finally I hit a point, was like, the why, like why could the universe possibly give me that would change what I have to do next? Because even if it came back and said, okay, you totally screwed up and you're like, you did this, then I still have to make different choices and different change. But it wasn't that. It was that, I could go back and literally change everything that I did, and we could still be in the situation, because it's based on decisions from people who are outside of me. And so when I stopped asking why, what happened, one of the first changes of reframing that I didn't even know I was reframing in the beginning is, every time I asked myself why, I would be like, okay, the why doesn't matter. What, Marsha? Like, what's an action? What's an action word? So I would literally in the moment go, oh, I'm asking why. Okay, no, what, and what can I do next? And that would just put me into action. And understand, action doesn't mean like going and investing into a massive program. Action was like turning on a podcast. Action was going out for a walk. Action was changing my state. Action was like taking care of me. Like, it was just, how can I take an action step? I always say that moves me closer to where I want to go instead of where I've been. When we ask why, we're always replaying the past, and our thoughts are only ever replaying the past or creating the future. So why is great if I'm going towards a goal, but when we're asking why because of something went wrong, we're replaying the past. And I'm not even giving myself a chance to create a future. I'm not. And so the title for me, when it landed, I was like, oh my God, that's it. And we had a publisher helping us with the book. She was like, oh, absolutely not. It's too long of a title. And I was like, no, that's the title. Like, just that's the title. And she was like,
Outspoken.
I know, right? Like 7 years ago. And she said, but people aren't going to get it. I said, I actually think they will. I actually think they will, because it doesn't matter what your story is. There comes a point that if you want to create change in your life, when your life plan doesn't go according to plan, which is always, I'm sorry to say that, it comes from a turning point of when can you stop asking why? Because the why is not moving you further forward. It's like, what are the action steps that you can use to create change? So that's been one of the most common things people comment. They're like, the title, it speaks to me. And I'm like, yeah, I thought it would. Like, to me, it summed it all up.
I think it's a really powerful title. I'm so glad you left it because I find that when tragedy happens, we ask why. In
Mm-hmm.
other words, we don't really care why. To be honest, who
It
cares
doesn't,
why?
it doesn't matter.
It's our way of saying I can accept this.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than saying it's really difficult for me to accept what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
we go why. But even if you knew why, does it really matter? It doesn't, right? It's
No.
about accepting, and as you said, what's next? How do we move forward after this? But
Yeah.
it's that acceptance piece that is so difficult.
It's
And
very difficult. It's very difficult. It was a very difficult turn. I don't ever want people to think that I'm saying it was like, oh, I changed my question and I was better. Oh my God, no, I changed my question thousands of times a day. Like literally, that's how often it was repeat patterns. I'd be like, why? And it's like, no, what? Why? No, what? Just what can I focus on? And doing that. And the other thing I really started to understand, like, is pardon me, of language and my words. So owning my choices was something where that came from.
I was going to ask you about the title of your podcast next. So there you go.
That's exactly where it came from, was because during that time I would stop and go, was that my choice? And I'm like, no, that one wasn't my choice. Was that my choice? No, that wasn't my choice. What I was recognizing is that I had a lot of resentment in the sense that I felt like my entire life was falling apart because of everyone else's decisions.
Mm.
Well, what happens, and moms do this even if you don't live in my story, because I work with a lot of moms, is that it's easy to build some subconscious resentment towards everyone else in your life without using your words and having conversation. But this subconscious resentment that, like, I'm so busy taking care of everyone else and no one's asking if I'm okay. Like and then all of a sudden I don't have anything left for me. It's everyone else's fault. And I had to come to a space of one thing to understand, like when we sit inside blame is victim mentality. Blame is when we're asking why. Blame is on the opposite end of the spectrum of ownership. They don't go together. And so whenever I'm in blame, I'm not in ownership. And I'm like, okay, so what can I own and what can I take responsibility for? And so when I be in a space of feeling like, okay, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm like, wait, is that my choice? Nope, that one's not mine either. Okay, wow, where are my choices in my day, in my life? And I started to recognize like a fraction of my day was about me. And in order to give myself a fighting chance for what we were walking in, because I do want to emphasize we were still living in it and it was very chaotic. Like it was a very chaotic scenario. The only way to give myself a fighting chance to deal with what we were dealing with was to take care of myself first. And that was owning my choices. And so that meant, okay, what does that mean? Well, what helps me to feel better every day? Again, maybe it's a walk, maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Taking care of me gave me a fighting chance with what we were walking through.
Wow. I so resonate with that. I can even think of genetic beliefs that we might have, especially thinking about your family, that you have 2 boys and a husband. So all boys, all men.
Mm-hmm.
I can even, I find that it might even be stronger, the genetic beliefs that the woman should be the caregiver. And, is that something you encounter looking at your beliefs genetically?
100%. Are you kidding? I feel like I know I subconsciously thought I did it, and I know I'm not alone. For some reason, a lot of moms, we believe that we signed this contract somewhere,
Mm.
that we are 100% responsible for every single thing that happens inside of our house, that we are responsible for keeping all the balls up in the air, that we can't ask for help. That's weakness. And if there's a problem, it's our job to fix it. Like, we put insane amounts of pressure on ourselves to fix, manage, control all of the moving parts. And actually, it's not doable. It's not doable. And so we lose ourselves in the process. And then when we lose ourselves in the process, we end up with this feeling of resentment that nobody's listening and nobody's checking in on how I'm doing. Meanwhile, if somebody did come to ask me if I needed help or support, my armor was so strong at that point that it's like, I'm fine. I've got this. Why would you think I don't have this? Like, it's so
You got
crazy.
this. I can hear your voice from the top. You got this.
I've got this. You got this. Like, you could do this. You got me. You.
Right.
And that would be the message I even heard in the beginning when I was asking for help with family. They're like, oh, if anyone can do this, you can. And I'm like, okay. So I guess I'm supposed to figure that out myself. Okay. Like, it's amazing what we do subconsciously to people by shutting them down. But that's what it was like to walk through, is feeling like I didn't know how to ask for and receive help. And that didn't help me to move forward. Like, and no one could have taught me that. I had to learn that myself.
I have to say that in my not personal experience, but experience with clients, it not only didn't help you, it didn't help your boys, because I
Right.
recall with some women that I coached that they were boys, had substance abuse
Yep.
problems, and I would use this analogy. I would tell them, "You feeling guilty for what he's going through? It's like you're taking your backpack and putting it on his back. Now he has his own, clearly, if he got to this point, he has his own issues.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you put your backpack of guilt on him?
Mm-hmm.
That's weighing him down. So of course he can breathe. But once we started working with that, and you take care of yourself and you remove the guilt and you stop asking why, now he only holds the weight of his own stuff, and he'll say, I can deal with this, it's not so bad. And sure enough, that was a turning point when the women, the mothers, realized that by feeling guilty
Mm-hmm.
and fearful, which is of course very, very normal, I'm not judging, you are actually not helping your child. You are weighing your child down. It's actually the opposite, which you might say, how can you not feel guilty and not be afraid?
It's
It's counterintuitive, but it's actually what's needed.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with feeling guilt. Been in this big stage of talking about all the emotions recently. There's nothing wrong with feeling
That's
guilty.
right.
It's when we turn around and we make a
For-
story about ourselves and project it, now we've made it significantly worse. There's nothing wrong with the emotion. It's what we make the emotion mean about it.
That's right.
And so I couldn't agree with you more. And it really does. I believe I had to come up with my own little mantras to make it through some of those days. Well, one thing I did learn is when I kept coming into a space of like, own my choices. What are my choices? Owning my choices. If two people are owning a decision, nobody owns it. And if nobody owns it, nobody changes it. Like, it's that. So it's status quo, tug of war, day in, day out. Like, that's literally all we're doing is tug of war, but nothing is changing. And that we're frustrated because nothing's changing, but we actually have to let go of the rope. Like, it's not our battle to fight. It's ours to stand strong. So there were times that even when they were younger, that they would come in and say something about school and something. I'm like, yeah, that's actually not my choice though. And they're like, oh, I'm so sick of all these your choices. And I'm like, I know, welcome to life. Like, this is just what life is.
But
Like,
that's so important.
it's freeing and it's setting them up. And I feel, I mean this, I know this is a really hard thing for people to see and feel in a sense. I really believe that had I never walked through what we did with our kids with substance abuse, if we had never walked through those lessons, I wouldn't have changed my thinking to really understand that I think the lessons that I had to learn on the journey, they're important for any parenting journey, regardless if you walked in my story or not. I actually really do, because I feel that it is, if we want to set them up for success, they have to build some confidence in having mistakes. not holding mistakes over top of them, like figuring out decisions, deciding what they want. Like, I think that all of the things that I learned on the journey, they were important to learn whether I had my story or not. And I think there's something that all parents have to learn. They're just not easy to learn. We were forced to.
That's so true.
Forced to, not in a bad, I don't mean in a bad way, because I know that sounds like but we
Or
were,
life puts you in that situation.
yeah, in that situation, survival, the only way we could do it was we had to start to look at things differently. And so tying it back to what you talked about earlier in your show, and a life of no regrets, that is something that has always boiled down for me, is that I had a grandfather who said that. It's like what, ask yourself, like, will I regret this if I don't do it, or if I don't decide to go for it? And so for me, I have always tried to take the standpoint with my kids that I want to know I have left no stone unturned on my part. I have turned over every stone that I can. That doesn't mean that it will fix the situation, because it might not be my stone that needs to be turned. But I want to know that I've left every single stone that I can. I wanted to give their higher self a chance. I love them no matter what. One phrase I always said to them is like, I will walk alongside you all the way, but I will not push and pull you through this life. That's not my job. It's not what I signed up for. And I wouldn't do it with my husband either. Like, it's my job to carry myself. That's that personal responsibility that's important. And when you do that, like, they're not ours to keep, they're ours to raise so that they can live the life that they're capable of doing. So I know not a lot of people would ever understand our journey. And I don't know if you could understand it fully unless you walked through it. But I'm beyond grateful for some of the lessons that I learned, because it's made me a very different person. Before this, I was very much a control person, control freak, like wanting to be seen as the armor, the strong, and now I'm just like, when people say like, you made a mistake in your copy, and I'm like, yeah, it's on brand. Like, it's not important. I don't worry about those. I've changed so much, and I don't think any of that would have been possible without our experience and our story.
And do you take, well, first of all, okay, I honor you. I don't know what it feels to go through that, which I'm grateful for that, of course, but I honor you for having so much grace about the process. Because, okay, the process is the process, the story is the story, but the grace and the wisdom that comes out of you can help any parent, like you said, whether they're going through this or a different challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all go through challenges with our children. So this is gold. So thank you for saying those words. Sometimes we need to hear them to give ourselves permission to do that. And the permission might come from, well, if my son is struggling in school, I can do that. If she could do it with substance abuse, that seems like it's more risky.
Mm-hmm.
Then I can definitely do that with a child struggling at school or whatever the challenge is. So in a way, not that people need permission, but because we tell ourselves different stories, as you said, we're conditioned that it's our problem.
Mm-hmm.
We have to own those choices.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving them permission to realize that the opposite is the right way to go. So thank you for that. This is really very graceful and very brave, very courageous. I'm so glad you are sharing those stories. And you have a community, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you help other people write their books. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's all been organic in how it's grown in, and then this is where, again, we like to see the how and know all the steps, but we have to keep growing into that version so that those steps can come to life. As of 2021, I had published 6 times. So 6 different collaborative books, or 5 different collaborative books. I had led 2 of them up until that point. Then I had solo book. We did our next one in 2022 and it released, and it was a collaborative book that we led the whole process. And in that process, we had a lot of challenges publishing wise. I've seen it from all sides. So I can say I have seen it from all sides. And I kept having this belief that it doesn't have to look this way. Like it just doesn't have to look this way. It doesn't have to be this difficult. It doesn't have to be this isolating. And I also recognize that, it's one thing to write the book. It's another to embody yourself with the identity as the author who can release the book. That no one trained me on how to do that. I had to learn that one a really hard way. So when my book released in 2017, it took.
What does it mean to own yourself?
That's
Tell
a
us
great
more
question.
about that.
Yeah, and it was a great question. So especially when it comes to vulnerable stories, I'll share it from this standpoint. We think that writing the book is the job. Okay. If we don't embody the identity of the author who can stand up with confidence and say, this is my book, I wrote it, I'm proud of it, what's the point of writing the book? Because, and I didn't know how to. And so when my book came out, it went like it was sitting beside Gabor Mate's books on Amazon. It was very much like, and that was very overwhelming for me because he was a mentor that I had learned from. I had news channels reaching out. I had media reaching out. I had a lot of exposure, and I didn't know how to be the confident person to say, yes, this was my story. Like, I didn't understand that was a big missing piece, is how can you take on the identity of being the author who can confidently say, yes, this is my story. So for 6 months after my book release, people would say to me, so you wrote a book. And I'm like, yep. And they're like, what's your book about? And I'm like, it's about a mom and a story that she walked through. It took me forever to be able to embody that identity. Now, when people say, what's your book about? I'm like, oh, I wrote it from a standpoint as a parent who was dealing with teen substance abuse. And literally it's like, oh my God, like that's just, I don't say it in that way. But I encourage people that if you have a part of your story that makes you feel like you might have this fear of judgment, learning how to say it first, you leave no room for, like, it was a great way for me to learn, but it took time to learn that. So that's what embodying the identity is. I just interviewed somebody last week whose book is launching in the next couple of months. It's an unbelievable story, and it's published and done and written. It's already getting ready to go. And I asked her, like, do you have any concerns about this book being out in the world? And because there's a really vulnerable story behind it that she hasn't really shared publicly. And she said, yeah, I'm terrified. And I'm like, okay, when are you going to work on that? Like, do you want can I just share something? Because it's very, you don't want to go through all the work of writing a book and get out in the world and then not be the identity of the author. So when somebody asks you about your book, you can't even confidently tell people what it's about because it's a vulnerability hangover. So it's a process of learning how to do that. And that's where I felt I could add a little bit of a unique approach with authors of how to share vulnerable stories. So, I mean, on a regular basis, people reach out with me, and I don't think there's too many stories that will surprise me anymore. Some of them are like, okay, well, this is pretty heavy. And they'll tell me, and I'm like, yep, heard them. It's all good. Like it's actually doesn't faze me. But I started to open up of like, can we help people to write their vulnerable stories and like become the author, the identity of the author who can proudly and confidently talk about it? Because there's a launch time for your book, right? We think the launch is like when the book is coming out. You can start talking about your book right from the moment you start writing it, because you build the confidence in yourself to keep like, this is who I am. This is my identity. This is who I am. This is the work that I do. It takes time to build that muscle if you've never built it before. And that's what I started to bring in with authors, is a lot of those NLP tools and techniques of how can we break through the limiting beliefs down here of why you think you can't write the book, and flip them and actually become the identity of the author who can say, yeah, this is my book. This is my story.
I so love what you said, because we go back to the formula. It's actions plus mindset. Yes, mindset is 95%, but action, or 90%, but action is still needed. So they took the action of writing the book, but now they're going to also need to work on their mindset. I say that to the coaches, that we integrate Theta Healing into the coaching certification, not just for your clients, for you. Because
100%.
once you graduate, that's only when you will encounter another layer of limiting beliefs about you actually doing the work. So as you grow to the next level of your genius zone, you're going to have to clear another level. So you need the tool to work on your subconscious to continuously grow. Otherwise, you'll stay under that layer. So I said, this is first and foremost for you.
Mm-hmm.
Don't think that the certification will be, that's it, I'm ready. You have to embody it. And part of embodying it is practicing, but also working on your beliefs. Absolutely.
You nailed
It's
it.
that combo of action and working on your beliefs. Action, and then you clear one layer. Great. Now you got up to here. You want to get to the next layer. You need to clear another layer. That's the journey. That's the work, right?
It is work. People think that I've already done that before. I'm like, yeah, and you're going to do it again. You're just going to
Oh,
keep doing it again. As you grow, like those limiting beliefs, like they come with you and they're part
absolutely.
of you. There's nothing wrong with you for having them. They're
Oh, no.
part of you. So how can you build a better relationship with you? Because with them, because when I'm doing that, like when I decided that I'm going to help people to publish their book, guess what happened? The very first two people that we brought in were, I think I can say this, they were a terrible fit. It was not a good fit. It was not, I wasn't ready and they were not a good fit. It couldn't have been more of a terrible fit. And then it took the third person that we brought in and we changed a lot. I had to change how we ran this part of our business. And I recognized that. And I started to work with people that it's like, no, that's the kind of person that we want to work with. I'm okay to say no. I'm okay to say, no, we're not doing that work. This is, I mean, she's an absolutely ideal client. In then comes in the last month a very big collaborative project that's going to require a whole team to do. If I don't take the time to grow into the identity of the person who could manage a team and work with people and have conversations with authors to say, okay, I know you wrote that with all your heart, but we got to start over. Like that's it. Like and if I don't do that, I'm not doing a service to anyone else. So the limiting beliefs, the bigger your goals get, they come with you. They don't go away.
Absolutely.
They come with
And
you.
sometimes it's even, people say, do the beliefs come back? Let's say he says, well, I work on the belief, it's safe for me to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
Will it come back? And I said, of course it will, but it won't at the same time. Because when you work on the first, it's safe for me to be successful, you define success as having, let's say, 10 clients.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have grown. And the next level for you is to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
And now you encounter that you have it safe for me to be successful, but success doesn't mean the same way. So
No.
even though the words are the same, because we're limiting how many words we can use, right? The subconscious is so linguistic, even though the words are the same, they don't mean the same. It's not the same belief, really.
It's not. It's not at all. And it's such it's just such a beautiful thing when you can, like, I used to resist them, and now when I see it, I'm like, oh, I see what you're doing. I can see what you're doing. Like, I know what you're trying to do, and you're trying to keep me safe, and I'm good. But thank you. Like, thank you for trying to have my back. And I know what you're trying to do. But when you can come at it from a different sense instead of resisting it, it really does change your relationship with it. And I love that you're saying that because it drives me crazy. I always share the story. I had a guest on my podcast, and he was talking about limiting beliefs, and he was my guest on my show. And he said, now that I've done that work, I have never had a limiting belief again. And I was like,
Oh, wow.
I just sat there and I said, you know what? I can't let this one go. Like, I just can't, because I don't want people to believe that that's true. I don't want them to believe that because that's actually not true. And I said, my question is anybody who says they never experience a limiting belief again, my question would be, how big are you growing? How big is your circle? Because my guess is you haven't left the circle that you built the comfort zone in. And he kind of looked and he goes, no one's ever said that before. And I'm like, I don't mean it disrespectfully, but I don't want people to think. It's really important for me that I am authentic. I am real. I will always shoot real over anything. I don't want people to think there's something wrong with them if those beliefs, those limiting beliefs come back up. Instead, how can you build a different relationship with them? Because they're just part of the equation. They're just part of the equation. And actually, those limiting beliefs made you who you are. So if I take it back to the beginning of the episode, the armor that I carried my whole life, I mean, yeah, do I wish I could have done things differently? But at the same time, that made me who I am. The resiliency and the grit that was in that, I needed to have that in order to get through some of those early stages in my life. And why do you think I could learn grace so much? Because it's, if I take it, right, like we learn the opposite. So I had the grit and I know what grit is. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, what if grace is on the exact same energetic level as what grit is?
Ooh.
And
I was going to ask you for a wisdom thought, but okay.
it just came, but it's just very like, I don't resist those parts of myself before because they made me who I am. And that's part of the work that I do is like, can we please stop telling ourselves these stories and resisting parts of ourselves, because we're perfectly designed as we are. And when we learn that and we accept that, I recognize that I love that fighter part of myself. And guess what? She still shows up regularly. She does, because she's part of me. But if I've learned grit at that high of a space, I also have found space to hold grace. And that, if you would have asked me years ago if I could ever see myself holding that, it would have been a flat no. I didn't understand that emotion at all. And now I can look at it often and I zoom out and I'm like, okay, in the big grand scheme of things, Marsha, how are you doing? Because life is not perfect. We still have our challenges. We still have lots of moving parts at once. We all do. But I can step back and go, you know what? Compared to an old version of yourself, doing really good. Like you're handling this really well. And I can meet myself with some grace. I can ask for help now. Like, I mean, we talk a little bit, you and I did on my show, but we talked a little bit about like my relationship with my husband when we went through all of this support in with our kids. We had many mentors say like, but how are you guys doing it? Like, I don't understand how you're still doing it, because we each had to work individually in order to bring more wholeness together, right? Two broken parts don't make a whole. You have to take care of yourself first. And that has improved my own conversation and grace and receiving. Because then there'll be some times where I'm like, you know what? I don't think I'm doing okay. And I don't really know why.
And when
Or
you're receiving, you make him feel like he's your man.
like and you know what? He wants to. Yeah. Does he love that he's got a independent, feisty, strong? Well, yeah, of course he does. He doesn't have to worry about a lot of things with me. That's for sure. But at the same time, to play a little bit on the masculine feminine, that is actually part of like, that's what he's wired to do. And there are times he's like, absolutely. And now it's not even, yes, I have to ask sometimes, but not that often. He'll just immediately, he's like, okay, so I'm going to do this and this. I'm like, that would be amazing. Thank you. Or I'm having a really off day. And he will say, will you please just take a nap? And I'm like, I don't have time to take a nap. He goes, all the more reason to take a nap. I've got it.
I love that.
And you know what? I'm like, you're right. And I will go and lay down, noisy in the house. I'll sleep solid for an hour. And I'm like, oh my God, I needed that. But I need that little bit of a nudge sometimes, that it's okay to listen and slow down. So it's really interesting. Like I share that
Oh, I find a lot
example.
of parallel between your relationship and mine.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. I feel that it's taken us a long time to learn this. And at the same time, you know, we've created a beautiful relationship. Our kids see it's a lot of give and take. There's a lot of respect. There's a lot of that's there. And we're a team in the things that we do. It's been a journey. It's been a journey, that's for sure.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing so much grace and wisdom. Is there anything you would like to leave the listeners with? I mean, you said so many beautiful things, but if there's any final thoughts that you would like to say.
I'm going to follow my gut on this. First off, thank you for having me and for giving me space to share in this way. It's like, it means the world to me, because I always believe that there's someone out there, as I say, someone somewhere is praying for the solutions you're holding on to. You get to decide if you're going to share them or not. And I want to encourage anybody that if you're in a space of looking at your story today and it's not the story that you want, that you can rewrite that story, regardless of what you've walked through up until now. I've interviewed over 700 people on my show. Like, it is literally, you can rewrite any story that you want. I've seen people do it. You do that by becoming the version of yourself that can like bring that new story to life. If it's in you, if it's dropping down for you, it's for you. The only steps are, how can you become that next version of yourself who can bring it to life? Because it's all possible. And there's something really beautiful about walking through something so difficult and doing something good in the world with it. That, I mean, if you would have told me 10 years ago that this is the work that I'd be doing, I never would have believed it, but I'm so grateful. It's what I'm doing. Beyond grateful.
Marsha, thank you so much. I honor you. I celebrate you. I want to thank you for teaching me that word. I celebrate you. I learned it with you. I never said that to anybody else, actually. I have beautiful wishes for people. I just never use that word. So thank you for teaching me that word. I think it's a beautiful word to celebrate. We usually celebrate events and milestones and accomplishments. But what about celebrating people?
Oh, absolutely.
It's so beautiful. So thank you for showing me how beautiful this is. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm sure that there's a reason why you're here, and that our listeners will benefit. Everybody in each piece, you share different nuggets of wisdom. So thank you, and God bless you.
Oh, so grateful
Thank
for you.
you. Thank you, Marsha.